It's the Ralph Nader Radio Hour.
Stand up, you've been sitting way too long.
Welcome to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour. My name is Steve Scrovan, along with my co-host David Feldman. Hello, David.
Hello, good morning.
And we have the man of the hour, Ralph Nader. Hello, Ralph.
Hello, everybody.
We have a jam-packed show today, and our first guest is a homie. I'm originally from Cleveland, and so is he. He won a seat on the city council when he was 23 and became Cleveland's boy mayor at 31. When Mr. Kucinich got to Cleveland, he found himself in a rigged system dominated by the city's business interests. When a ruthless coalition of the Cleveland Electric Illuminating Company and their banking allies tried to kill the city's public power authority, what did he do? We'll ask him about that and his new book, The Division of Light and Power, which details his battle to defend the city's interests. Here's a question. What could we do with an extra $7.6 trillion? Today's uber rich rely on a baroque system of loopholes to cling to every red cent. Yes, they use their resources to lobby for special privileges, fight against tax increases, and fend off corporate oversight. But that's not enough. Researchers estimate that 10 to 12% of the world's private wealth, anywhere from $7.6 trillion to $36 trillion, that's with a T, has been hidden away from public view. How has this shadow industry of tax havens, shell companies, opaque trusts, and other mechanisms worked for so long? We'll ask our second guest, Chuck Collins, to shed a little light on that. In his new book, The Wealth Hoarders, he exposes the systems that have created hereditary dynasties of wealth and power. And that's not all. There are a lot of reasons to divest from fossil fuels. They're bad for the environment, poisoning water, and killing plants and animals. Burning them takes carbon out of the ground and releases it into the atmosphere. They're bad for our health, full of carcinogens and irritants. They're not a sustainable energy source. We're running out. They're not a smart investment. They're unreliable, difficult to extract. And with all of the environmental and medical costs tacked on, they're ludicrously expensive. So to close out today's show, we're going to look at wind power. No, I'm not talking about the blowhards in Congress. I'm talking about a new wind farm project on the Standing Rock Reservation. We'll be joined by Joseph McNeill, the manager of SAGE, the reservation's public power authority. We'll ask him about how the wind farm will help the Standing Rock Sioux tribe work toward energy independence, economic growth, and how that will protect the environment for generations to come. And somewhere in between, wouldn't be a show if we didn't have Russell Mokhiber, a corporate crime reporter. But first, let's talk to a man who is truly ahead of his time. David?
When our next guest ran for president, he proposed the novel idea of a Department of Peace. Dennis Kucinich is the author of The Division of Light and Power. Mr. Kucinich served as mayor of Cleveland and as U.S. representative for Ohio's 10th Congressional District. He's recently announced that he's running once again for mayor of Cleveland. Welcome to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour, Dennis Kucinich.
Thank you very much. It's great to join all of you and to be back in touch with Ralph Nader.
Thank you, Dennis. We go back a long way, as you know, and in your fights in Washington, you were often the single voice of dissent, and you're the only guy we could go to in Congress for any kind of engagement with our national legislature. So thank you for that, including the only member of Congress to hold hearings on the inner city exploitation of minorities when several chair people who are African American of major committees wouldn't touch the subject. So it's unfortunate that you were redistricted out. They pitted you against Congresswoman Capter, and only one of you could win. And the Republicans, in effect, chose you as the person to be most vulnerable in losing your seat. But you've bounced back. You've announced you're running for mayor of Cleveland. Hope you can once again make Cleveland a reform city. And this book you've written, I've read every page. It is an engrossing book, to put it mildly, very well written, devastating in its impact, although its style is understated. And I might say this, because I know you've read this investigative reporter's materials. In 1904, Lincoln Steffens wrote a book called Shame of the Cities. He went to various cities. He'd go into bars and he'd say, who's running this city? He always got the right answer. People knew who ran the city, the big bank, the particular politician. And he put them all together in a book called Shame of the Cities. Your book, The Division of Light and Power, is by far the most detailed accounting, firsthand, of how corporations and their media allies try to turn a city into their profitable pretzel. And in this case, you were opposing him as city council and as mayor, and so you flushed them out like they've never been flushed out before, even though the Cleveland Plain Dealer and the biggest bank and the biggest law firm were all allied against you in favor of the big business domination of Cleveland. So let me start with this, Dennis. You're going to be very busy now running in the primary for mayor. You're already the front runner, I understand. Why did you write this book now when I, for one, have been waiting for you to write this book for 20 years?
Look, I started the book 40 years ago. Actually, I started it in November of 79, to be exact. And I began it at Bob Scheer's house in Berkeley, California, with Bob and Narda hosting myself and my wife. I was so close to the events. These events were searing. If you believe that reality is socially constructed and culturally affirmed, I walked into a world that became upside down. And, right was wrong and wrong was right. And it took a while to process that. And finally, I started writing, and I had 1 draft, 2 drafts, 3 drafts. I didn't like it, just set it aside, began again. This publication represents the 7th draft. I left Congress in 2013. I began to focus in writing, and I got closer. By 2018, I knew that I was on the right track, and I just wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote for a few years. And finally, that's what you see. So this, I began
in
14 years ago.
In addition to your prodigious memory of events, you have it very well footnoted in that sense. I mean, listeners, you've got to read this book because he confronts unbelievable assaults and greed and power and dismissing the interests of low-income people and whole neighborhoods by this corporate-dominated structure backed by the Cleveland Plain Dealer, which has disgraced itself. And he really shows how believable it is and how it happens in cities all over the country. But there's, no Dennis Kucinich there to flush them out. Explain what the Municipal Light Company, which was the core of one of the battles, is called Muni Light. And in fact, the title of your book is reflective of that. You say the division of light and power. So this all started because the electric company that dominated Cleveland, privately owned, couldn't stand a municipal electric utility in the city of Cleveland. Explain.
That's right. And the book opens with the blackout at Christmas time. I'd just been elected to Cleveland City Council. All the lights go off in downtown Cleveland. I call the Division of Light and Power, the title of the book. That's also the name of the division that ran the city's electric system. I said, what's going on? The boiler operator told me, well, we got the number 6 boiler down. And then he related to me that the Cleveland Electric Illuminating Company, CEI, was shafting the city because they wouldn't give the city a backup in case of an outage. And Cleveland had one of the only cities in the country that was isolated in case of blackout. Well, as the story develops, I bring the reader along with me on a journey into corporate espionage, sabotage, the efforts by CEI to put Muni Light out of business involved the media, involved, of course, the political establishment, involved the rest of the Cleveland corporate establishment. They basically constructed a condition where the city was not going to be able to operate a public power system. Here's an example. The utility lobbyists blocked the repairs to the Muni Light generators by lobbying the city council to hold them up. Then, when the city tried to get power from outside, because it couldn't generate enough, the CEI blocked the city again. Then the city could only buy emergency power from CEI. So CEI tripled the cost of emergency power to the city over what they charge anyone else and tried to drive Muni Light into a deficit. And then they were creating blackouts, deliberately creating blackouts on the Muni Light system when we were purchasing power from them because they operated the power transfer in such a way as to cause the blackouts to happen.
And to put you on the defensive, they use strategic.
Absolutely.
Imagine a private utility company, electric company, listeners, using manipulative blackouts every time Dennis Kucinich, when he was mayor, was getting an advantage on them, building public support for them, because they figured by a blackout they could blame the mayor and this municipally owned electric utility, Muni Light. Go ahead.
So when they created these blackouts, the next day, CEI salesmen were at the doors of Muni Light customers saying, looks like your power system isn't working. Why don't you have one that's reliable? So this was a mob kind of mentality. But the strategy that was executed by CEI was a military type strategy across the board. And it preceded my becoming mayor. It actually preceded my becoming a councilman. But as it was ramping up, I got in the city council. I saw what was going on. I blew the whistle, and I started to take a stand to warn the people what was this skullduggery that was going on and trying to steal our municipal electric system. And that's when I started a public campaign, and that's when a high-powered rifle shot missed my head by a fraction as the campaign to save the system started to ramp up.
When you were sitting at home, weren't you?
Yeah, right. I was at home.
And also, every time they thought they had you on the ropes, you went back to the people. You organized the neighborhoods. They even tried to race bait you because the chairman of the city council when you were mayor was George Forbes, who is a corporate lawyer in a powerful corporate law firm. At the same time, he was African American, and you were very tender in the way you handled them. And they tried to race bait you, a stereotype which spread around the country. Unfortunately, was accepted by too many liberals in Washington, D.C. This is well before you ran successfully for Congress and showed that you were just the opposite. You were an aggressive representative of minorities and lower income people. And isn't it true that in his retirement, near 90 years old, your major antagonist, George Forbes, concurred that you were essentially right about Muni Light? Isn't that true?
Yeah, it is. George and I are friends today, and, he played his role, I played mine. And, he basically said, Dennis was right, and he actually was quoted as saying default never had to happen.
Tell us what happened to the antitrust prosecution of this giant utility, CEI, in Ohio, and is Muni Light survived?
Well, Muni Light has survived, but it's been mismanaged again. And that's another subject for another show, Ralph. But I will say that the antitrust suit that was filed in 1975, in July, that suit identified violations of numerous provisions of antitrust law by CEI against the city of Cleveland. And all of that was known when a year later, the city accelerated the efforts to sell the system. The antitrust suit, however, was supported further by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's own investigation, which supported the city's findings. And then the lawsuit, of course, opened up the door to discovery, and thousands of internal CEI documents also made the case that they did everything they could to thwart, impede, interrupt, and sabotage the Cleveland's municipally owned electric system. And all this, as you have pointed out earlier, is thoroughly documented in the book. I'm using court documents, Nuclear Regulatory Commission, Atomic Safety and Licensing Commission documents. We even have done this, which very few books have. We've created an annex under the Division of Power and Light. And if you go into the book and get the URL, you can go to the annex, which has thousands of pages of documents, the copies of the original documents that people can actually see for themselves what was argued in court.
I must say, this is very relevant to you listeners all over the country. There are slightly over 1,000 municipally owned electric companies in the United States, even Jacksonville, Florida, for example, and they are mostly retail, and they are hounded and disadvantaged by the large private electric generating companies to this day to make them look bad and stereotype anything owned by the government as inefficient or unreliable.
Right.
So this is a very relevant book. Your book just came out, right? Where can people get it?
first of all, try your local bookstore and ask them if they don't have it to order it. They can do that. They can go online. There's many different places to get it, Barnes & Noble, Target. Go to Finney Avenue Books, Finney Avenue Books.com, and you'll see a list of many, many places you can purchase the book.
It's called The Division of Light and Power by Dennis Kucinich. The amazing part of your book, Dennis, was how this banker who ran Cleveland Trust, the biggest bank, and got the other banks along with him, it was like his mission was to weaken you, undermine you, drive you out of office. I mean, he had like a vendetta against you. Yeah. And even if it involved bringing the city of Cleveland down, like as you say.
Yeah, it made no sense whatsoever. I mean, you have to remember that the defaulted notes at that point involved about $15 million, $5 million of which was held by Cleveland Trust. I mean, we went in default over what is truly a pittance. And get this, we offered income tax revenue, we offered property tax, property sales, we offered other means of paying off the debt. The bank would not accept anything but Muni Light, the sale of Muni Light. And they wanted to buy it at a cut rate. The system was worth at least $250 million. They wanted to get it for 88.1. And of course, we learned later on the ties between the bank and the utility monopoly, they were in some ways Siamese business twins. And so this, epic story of the Division of Light and Power details not only the corruption of the banks and the utilities company, but also the unfortunate complicity of the media in many ways, which, eventually it took the courage of a reporter by the name of Bob Holden to shake things up at the Plain Dealer to where they were forced to report on CEI's concerted efforts over a period of decades to undermine Muni Light.
Don't forget the corporate law firm whose name was?
Well, Squire, Sanders, and Dempsey was the firm that represented CEI, but it turns out also they represented the city of Cleveland, and Cleveland, it wasn't just Muni Light, but they were provided all the city's financial records. They knew every dot and comma of every financial document the city had. And so what they did, there was a point at which, and I point this out in the book, where they started to make city finances an issue, and they cooked it up so that the city would be in a perilous position. They were guiding the city into the shoals and then claiming that, well, it looks like the city's going to be in financial trouble. This is an unprecedented attempt to oust a government elected by the people.
It was. Unfortunately, there aren't enough people in other cities who behave in a way where the corporations think it's needed to oust. They usually own them. What'd you do on the contracts? There's another great innovation in terms of how you handled contracts with the city by vendors.
Well, we went over every one of them, and if they were to the disadvantage of the people, they didn't get their contract renewed. I mean, we knew that the contracts, there were millions of dollars in contracts that were either not necessary or were padded, and we systematically eliminated that. And, we ran a very tight ship. And because of the default, we were smeared, and it said, well, we didn't even know how to run a government. Well, really? Yeah, we didn't know how to run a government as a gas station for interest groups.
You inherited a situation where there weren't competitive bids, right?
No, often there was requirement contracts that were done without competition. The whole thing about municipal government is it can work. As I pointed out at the beginning of the book, I say government works. The question is, who's it working for? And I want to pay homage here to Mayor Tom Johnson, of whom Lincoln Steffens wrote, was the best mayor of the best governed city in the United States. He was from Cleveland. It was his idea to create a municipal electric system. And here's the admonition he gave that I think is timeless. He said, I believe in public ownership of all municipal service facilities, of waterworks, and went on, parks, and of course that would include electric systems, because if you do not own them, they will in time own you. They'll rule your politics, corrupt your institutions, and finally destroy your liberties.
That was over 100 years ago.
Well, he was quoted in a book that was published in 1911, and I'm sure he said that before that. And that is a leitmotif for any kind of consideration of privatization. And Ralph, keep in mind that once the American Rescue Plan money runs out, cities are going to be hard-pressed to either continue the programs they started with that money or to continue their basic services, and privatization will move right up to the top of the agenda in urban America, and these corporations are going to be licking their chops to move in on water systems, electric systems, sewer systems, and every kind of municipal service to try to privatize it to capitalize on the weakened position that cities will find themselves in a couple of years.
Without a doubt, they're already doing it and taking over, buying small water systems in New England, for example, the big electric utility Eversource, which has its share of self-induced blackouts, leading to its nickname NeverSource.
Listen, I appreciate being on. I appreciate you getting the word out about the Division of Light and Power. Ralph, thank you so much for everything you did to make sure that we could save that system, because without you coming into Cleveland at a critical time to alert people as to what was going on and to use your national stature on behalf of our city, I don't know that we could have won it.
Well, on my part, I couldn't believe the pressure you were under and how you withstood it. You come from a family with a large number of siblings, so a lot of it must have been the way you were brought up, Dennis. And just tell our listeners how they can connect with you again on that website.
Kucinich.com. And, there's many different ways you can leave messages there, but I really appreciate being on the show. It's KUCINICH.com.
And the book just out, The Division of Light and Power, a massively engrossing book with names, with quotable participants, engagements, collisions, battles, drama, tension, vindication. I mean, I tell you, I very rarely read a book of this size that you really have a hard time putting down. So congratulations on it, Dennis, and we look forward to future contributions to justice in Cleveland and America and the world from you and your wife, Elizabeth.
Ralph, thanks again, and thanks to everybody connected with the show.
We've been speaking with Dennis Kucinich. We will link to his book, The Division of Light and Power, at ralphnaderradiohour.com. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk to Chuck Collins about his book, The Wealth Hoarders. But first, let's check in with our corporate crime reporter, Russell Mokhiber.
From the National Press Building in Washington, D.C., this is your Corporate Crime Reporter Morning Minute for Friday, June 18, 2021. I'm Russell Mokhiber. Soccer star Cristiano Ronaldo's removal of 2 Coke bottles at a Euro 2020 news conference coincided with a $4 billion drop in the market value of the American drink giant. That's according to a report from ESPN. The Portugal captain was visibly troubled when he saw 2 bottles of Coca-Cola in front of him as he sat down to speak to the media on Monday in Budapest ahead of his national team's Group F opener against Hungary. Ronaldo, an advocate for a healthy diet, moved the glass bottles out of the camera frame and instead held up a bottle of water and said in Portuguese, "Water." Earlier in the week, French midfielder Paul Pogba, a practicing Muslim, removed a bottle of Heineken beer that had been placed in front of him at a news conference. For the Corporate Crime Reporter, I'm Russell Mokhiber.
Thank you, Russell. Welcome back to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour. I'm Steve Scrovan, along with David Feldman and Ralph. Our next guest inherited a tremendous amount of wealth, and he spent most of his life trying to give it all away. David?
Chuck Collins co-edits inequality.org. He's written several books, the latest of which is The Wealth Hoarders, How Billionaires Pay Millions to Hide Trillions. Welcome back to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour, Chuck Collins.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, Chuck, welcome back. People know from our prior interview that you were about to inherit in your 20s a significant fortune, which you gave to educational and charitable outlets and proceeded in intervening decades to be an advocate for tax justice and led the fight successfully to block George W. Bush and his allies in Congress from eliminating the estate tax. You actually organized very rich people, over 1,000, into a lobby. I thought that we could never stop this because the Republicans had the votes, but you did stop it, and we want to congratulate you on that victory. But in the book, The Wealth Hoarders, How Billionaires Pay Millions to Hide Trillions, you really do the whole circuit. You don't just focus on the wealthy tax evaders, tax avoiders, how they create the tax rules, IRS and Congress, to let them escape all over the world, tax havens from the Cook Islands to the Canary Islands to the Cayman Islands, you name it, all these tax havens. But you focus also on the enablers, the big corporate tax accounting firms, the corporate law firms, the various people who shoehorn this and make a very lucrative living out of it. And then you have a lot of good recommendations at the end. So give us the range here. I don't think anybody knows how big it is. It's over $24 trillion that they've hoarded. Nobody really knows the whole figure, but that seems to be a minimal one. And it's all over the world, all kinds of complex trusts, etc. And you got this little IRS with its cash-strapped budget. They don't have a clue what's going on because they don't have enough staff. And when they do have a clue, they're up against law firms that have 1,000 lawyers in them and can drag out proceedings, forcing weak settlements. So tell us the thesis of the book, why you think this book is different from your other books, and what you think can change in the Biden administration.
Well, I think since the estate tax didn't go away, what the super wealthy have done is figured out how to plan around it, how to move money, and how to move it to the shadows. And so this book is really, and it comes out of my personal experience, which is, wealthy people, they might be able to hide some money on their own, but they need some help. They need professional wealth defense, wealth managers who invent new forms of trusts, who have the relationships globally to move money around to tax havens. They are, as you say, Ralph, the enablers. And so without them, this system would not be as porous. And yeah, the estimate is somewhere between 24 and $36 trillion globally has moved to the shadows. So we can talk all we want about tax policy and, the Biden proposals to raise taxes on the wealthy, but unless we shut down this hidden wealth system, we're not going to make much progress.
Well, first of all, the IRS is still run by Trump's IRS chief. How do you explain that? When is Biden going to have his own chief?
Yeah, no, I think that what you're pointing out is so important, which is the enforcers have just been devastated and lacking in leadership. And Biden has said, look, he wants to invest $80 billion in rebuilding the capacity of the IRS to follow these shell games that the super wealthy have.
Over 10 years.
Over 10 years, that's correct. But as you pointed out, they are just completely outgunned. They used to have what they call the rich squad, which were people who sort of understood how these various transactions worked, how, tried to stay at parity with this wealth defense industry, the tax lawyers, estate lawyers, and be able to disentangle and do the kind of forensic accounting to figure out, is this a real business transaction or is this just a phony tax dodge? And, for more than 10 years, the capacity of the IRS to do that. So rebuilding the enforcement is a key piece of fixing this.
Well, the problem is Delaware. Biden comes from Delaware. The two senators, Carper and Coons, are Democrats, but they protect this corporate state of Delaware, where the laws are so lax that a lot of big corporations like General Motors, Citigroup, charter in Delaware because shareholders have very few rights, all the stakeholders very few rights, and it's pretty much a wonderful paradise for the bosses of corporations to do what they want. So that's not a very auspicious beginning. At the other end, in Congress, you have Chairman Richard Neal from liberal Western Mass behaving like a Republican. And when he took over the chair, in January 2019, Chuck Collins, the first thing he said was he wasn't going to look into the massive Trump tax cuts for the super rich and the corporations. Imagine, no hearings. And I'll tell you in a minute my conversation with his chief of staff. But the one thing about this book that was at the end, where you have your proposals, is you finally focus on Congress. I would have focused on Congress right from the beginning, because most of what you want to get through to make the U.S. one of the worst tax evading and avoiding countries in the world, in the developed world, is Congress. Congress is the gateway. So how do you look at the scene given what I've just described? And, Nancy Pelosi and Senator Schumer, the heads of the House Democrats and the Senate Democrats, have never been known for pushing for real tax reform. Schumer actually defended the carried interest loophole that is estimated to cost the country $180 billion over 10 years. So what's your contemporary view here, and what do you think needs to be done back home? Pressure.
Well, you're right. We need to focus on the federal changes, and it's true. Congressman Richie Neal, he's been captured by the life insurance industry since he was the mayor of Springfield, Massachusetts. He's not, going to be a leader on this. The pressure is going to come from other places. One interesting thing is that Congress did pass at the end of last year this Corporate Transparency Act as part of the National Defense Authorization Act. It requires corporations to disclose who their real beneficial owners are to FinCEN, to the Treasury Department. We're now in the process of, fighting over what the rules are going to be and how meaningful that will be. But that is a really good framework because it basically does an end around Delaware. It says, sorry, Delaware, your state laws are superseded now by a federal law that a limited liability company has to report who their real owners are.
Chuck, explain to our listeners how Delaware operates here. It's really quite remarkable.
Yeah, Delaware, as you said, it's because of its very corporate-friendly court system, its chancery court system, and its limited liability company incorporation rules, where you can create a limited liability company, LLC, without having to disclose who the real beneficial owners are. You can have an anonymous company. And so that's why Delaware has become kind of the mecca for whether it's El Chapo, narco traffickers, or people incorporating sex trafficking or child pornography websites, or if you're the former president and you want to, funnel your bribery money to Stormy Daniels, you run it through your Delaware LLC. So it's one of the weak links really globally in the effort to kind of have corporate transparency. But the good news is at the federal level, there's an overriding national law. It doesn't give you and I a public registry, which I think would be really what we should have, but it does allow at least law enforcement to look under the hood and find out who's running this company.
Let me tell you my experience with the Chief of Staff, nice fellow, Richard Neal, chairman of the powerful House Ways and Means Committee. There's a petition from the constituents in his district. I think it's about 200 people. They're connecting with some progressive librarians. They've had meetings. They know what they're talking about. And they want a virtual town meeting with Chairman Neal. He's pretty averse to town meetings generally throughout his career, although he had one a couple weeks ago. And they sent him the petition, and they waited and they waited. No answer, not even an acknowledgement. So I called up the Chief of Staff, and I said, Bill, what's going on here? You have people doing what they're supposed to be doing, engaging, they're informed, they want to connect, they want to ask the congressman who is very powerful about how much the IRS budget is going to be expanded, they want to ask him about tax loopholes for multinationals, they want to ask him why he hasn't allowed 5 subcommittees to have probing investigatory hearings, including his number 2 ranking, Lloyd Doggett from Texas, who is a very progressive legislator. And he said, we're all focusing on the infrastructure bill. That's taking it all up. It's all the infrastructure. We want to finish it by the August recess. I said, Bill, do you know who you're talking to? Do you know that I expect Congress to be able to chew gum and walk at the same time? You got 5 subcommittees with good budgets and staff, and they're not focusing exclusively on infrastructure. They can do other things. They can educate the public. They can subpoena documents. They can push the Treasury Department. They can revive grassroots expressions. You say, he acknowledged it was a fair point. He was going to check with the subcommittee. But you see how sedentary the whole process is as they prepare for another 4 or 5 week recess in August. So that's where we're at, Chuck. It is so bad that they won't even respond, and others have done the same thing as Neal, to a virtual town meeting where they can do it right out of their desk on Capitol Hill or right out of their home. What do you propose to people? You can't tell people contact your member of Congress without also facilitating them. And by the way, they're working with the patriotic millionaires, which you mentioned in this book. What's your
Yes.
advice?
Well, I know the group you're talking about in the Berkshires, and they are doing a great job doing exactly what citizens should be doing, putting pressure on a member. And I think this is important to say this is a case study of how the wealth defense industry works, which is they work to stop things from happening. It's not sometimes that they get every piece of legislation they want passed, but they stop, and they often stop by providing ample campaign contributions to a couple of the committee chairs who control the flow of activity. But, in this case, taxing the wealthy, and this is what we've been saying with the Patriotic Millionaires Group, right now, taxing the wealthy is very popular. In fact, the infrastructure bill is more popular with the wider public when you tell them that it will be paid for by taxes on the wealthy and on global corporations that have been dodging taxes. People are right there, lined up, excited about proposals to tax the wealthy. We all know how out of balance the system is. So, and I would take heart that, Congress, even in a captured environment, passed legislation that's requiring greater corporate transparency. And then there are things that we can do. I know we want to work at the Washington level, but municipalities can also require disclosure of who's buying the real estate. All over the country, shell companies are buying luxury real estate, often, as a form of wealth storage or hiding kleptocratic capital from around the world. Why shouldn't cities have the power, and Los Angeles is currently putting this forward, to have municipal disclosure? You want to own property in our city? You need to tell us who owns it. It's like getting a library card. You need to tell us who you are and where you live.
And not only that, as you point out in your book, they leave these condos that they invested in order to park money from abroad, like was done with Trump's condos and wealthy Russians. They leave them empty. I mean, in some cities, Toronto as well as Miami and elsewhere, there are lots of these condos empty. They're not exactly meeting housing needs. They're replacing.
Yeah, these are global forces that are disrupting our local housing markets. We're pushing up the cost of land and development, leaving thousands of units vacant just so the super billionaire class can kind of park their assets and have an option outside the stock market. So yeah, we should be taxing luxury real estate transactions. We should be requiring ownership disclosure. We should basically tax vacancies. No property should be sitting vacant just for a way to park some capital. And actually the province of British Columbia has done that.
And, near the end of your book, I think you have 7 recommendations. You want to go through those very quickly?
Well, if I would update them, or I would just say where you and I started talking about enforcement is absolutely right. I would say this transparency movement, disclosing who owns. Banks now have more rules around disclosure. Why shouldn't other entities, whether they're consulting firms or accountancy firms and others, also disclose red flag transactions? We should just simply take a much closer look at trusts and the way trusts are manipulated, and basically just outlaw certain forms of trusts that have no purpose other than tax avoidance or obscuring ownership. Maybe at different points there's a legitimate purpose for a trust to care for a special needs family member or whatever, but now they are one of the main mechanisms that are being used to sequester and hide wealth.
Anybody who's interested in more detail, Chuck's talking about, it starts on page 154. And the other thing I want to run by you very quickly, Chuck, is the American Bar Association. You really go after the world's largest bar association for being very much involved in this global tax evasion and avoidance nationally and internationally. Can you give us a capsule description here?
Yeah, the American Bar Association, and particularly the Tax and Estate Section, they are very powerful. They lobbied against this Corporate Transparency Act, even when other sections of the ABA who care about human rights and rule of law were advocating for transparency. I had, a Global Witness did an interesting thing where they went around New York with a hidden camera and interviewed, they kind of created a situation where somebody was saying, well, listen, I'd like to hide money. I represent this dictator from a mineral-rich country, and I'm looking for ways to get the money out of that country and into the U.S. And 17 lawyers all said they would help him, including the acting president of the ABA, saying, "Oh, well, we can help you find ways to bank that money offshore initially and bring it onshore." They all are working to help the super rich kind of lubricate and facilitate the system of wealth hiding. So
except for one lawyer.
Except for one lawyer with great integrity said, "This smells. I don't want to do business with you."
He threw him out of the office.
Yeah. And actually there's an interesting thing, Ralph, which is one thing. I think the system is cracking a little bit from the inside. A lot of what we know about this wealth defense industry and hidden wealth is because people have leaked information, often at great risk. Somebody working at the Panamanian law firm Mossack Fonseca leaked that data. Someone recently leaked data to ProPublica about the billionaires and how little they were paying in taxes. And I have a group of attorneys that are helping members of Congress rewrite laws to shut down some of these hidden wealth systems, bringing their expertise of decades working to helping the rich. They've traded places. They're whistleblowers, and they're saying, I want to help shut this system down, and they're using their expertise to do that. So that to me is a sign of sort of the system cracking a little bit from the inside, as well as the pressure mounting from the outside.
Well, you have a convenient list on page 179 of individuals and groups who are fighting the good fight the way you are that people can connect with, including investigative journalist groups, International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, and others like the FACT Coalition, the Tax Justice Network. So you can connect the listeners with people. They all have their websites. They're all eager to have you participate. Here's the last question, which is really in some ways the most important in your book, which is for people who say, oh, the rich get rich, so what? How does it affect the rest of us in the COVID period? So talk about the deadly effects on the well-being of people in all these countries when the super rich hoard their wealth and control the tax laws, including how unprepared we were because we disinvested in our own country, especially public health systems.
Yeah, the real cost of this system is, first of all, the rich are not paying their fair share of taxes. They're shifting the obligations onto everyone else. But these extreme inequalities are making our societies ill-prepared. We could have been investing in public health infrastructure that would have enabled our societies to respond so much better to the pandemic. And even during the pandemic, as we know, U.S. billionaires have seen their wealth go up $1.6 trillion over the pandemic. And I think that's the ultimate price is extreme inequality undermines healthy societies, democratic institutions. That prevents society from being able to respond to the big challenges facing us, inequality and climate disruption. So it's not just, oh, isn't that too bad that these rich people have so much money? It is destabilizing and undermining the quality of life for everyone else on the planet.
We've been talking with Chuck Collins, the never-stop advocate for tax equity and for an equitable and just society, the author of the brand new paperback, 200 pages, clearly written, listeners, The Wealth Hoarders, How Billionaires Pay Millions to Hide Trillions. How can people contact you, Chuck, before we close?
Yeah, check out the website that I co-edit, inequality.org. We have a bunch of new stuff up there about dynasty trusts and this hidden wealth system. And the wealthhoarders.com is a good site for the book, wealthhoarders.com. Definitely check out the book, see some of the excerpts. We even have a couple videos about some of these ideas. But I hope people will read the book and get fired up and organize.
Thank you very much, Chuck Collins.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
We've been speaking to Chuck Collins. We will link to his book, The Wealth Hoarders, at ralphnaderradiohour.com. But now we're going to have one final section here. When you hear the name Standing Rock, most of us associate that with the natural gas pipeline. Our next guest is determined to make Standing Rock known instead for its wind farm. David?
Joe McNeill is an enrolled member of the Standing Rock Sioux tribe and the general manager at Sage Development Authority. Welcome to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour, Joe McNeill.
Oh, it's good to meet you guys. Let me say my introduction to you. How me takiapi, chante washte nape choose apelo. I said, hello, my relatives. I greet you with open hand and open heart. Tatanka Wajila e Machiapi. My name is One Bull. My American name is Joseph McNeil Jr., and I'm happy to be with you.
Indeed, we're very happy to have you on the show, Joe. I take it you share Winona LaDuke's view of massive wind power replacing fossil fuels, especially in the upper Midwest.
We do, in the context that we have to produce the ability to provide for our people in a way that doesn't destroy the environment. We are headed towards a precipice of pretty severe consequences if we keep going this route, and we have to stop. That's flat out. There's really not a lot of mitigating that. We have to turn to other alternatives and turn to them pretty quickly, but it's the big machine that you fight.
Well, tell us how you're fighting it. What are your proposals?
We are looking at 235 megawatt wind farm here at Standing Rock to sell commercially, and then with the revenue from that project, build microgrid systems and home energy systems for our people here to reduce the cost of power. So we will take the revenue that we have and build systems here for our communities. So we're a community started, community directed, and community benefit. Also to provide other infrastructure needs for our people here at Standing Rock Sioux Tribe.
Give us an idea of the size of the tribe and how much of the tribe will be serviced by over 200 megawatts.
So over 235 megawatts, again, that's being sold for commercial use, and we're interviewing possible power purchasers now, and that revenue will come back to service our membership here at home. We have roughly 8,000 members here at Standing Rock that currently live, and Standing Rock itself is about the size of Connecticut. We encompass a land base between North Dakota and South Dakota. We're right on the border there. We lie right along the shore of the Missouri River, 90 miles of riverfront, and that's where a lot of this was able to be spurred from, because as the tribe, we've been working on developing wind power for 20 years, but the time was never right. Developers would come and pitch it, but it always ended up being a land lease deal. But this is a chance for us, as we're working to crowdsource fund this so that we increase our equity ownership stake in the project, to have us an ownership stake so that we gain more benefit from it. Use that revenue to build consecutive projects behind it.
Is it going to be structured as a cooperative or tribally owned?
Our Sage Development Authority, the tribe had started this corporation specifically to serve as the utility for the tribe. So we are American Public Power Associated Public Power Utility member, and we will be providing those services to our tribal members. As we gain more capacity through training and acquisition of the existing infrastructure here at Standing Rock Energy Infrastructure, we will slowly build out over the next 10 years to hopefully acquire, that's the long range goal, is to acquire total usership of the existing electric infrastructure here at Standing Rock. So for us, it's building, buying, and maintaining capacity for a long-term infrastructure stake.
Tell us, Joe, about financing and timetable.
We are in pre-development for our project, means we are de-risking it. And that's where we've been able to generate some funds through our crowdsource funding. We've had great partners that came in, foundations like Wallace Global, Sierra Club. We also talked to JPB Foundation, other foundations like Bush here in the Dakotas and Minnesota have been assisting us to build the capacity that we need to in order to de-risk the project. And in that de-risking is where we gain an equity stake and ownership. Our next steps, as we are getting site control now, what's important for us in site control is that we don't disturb sacred sites. That was the big issue of the DAPL pipeline, is that they went through sacred sites, identified sacred sites, and that's something that we hold in high respect. So along the landscape where the turbines are, there are some sacred sites, so we are completely avoiding that.
Steve?
Joe, I wanted to ask you, tell us more about the crowdfunding initiative, because we want to push that out. Tell people how they can get involved with that.
I really appreciate that. We are on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and we have our own website. On all of those other handles, it's at Sage, SRST, SAGE, SRST.com, and there are links there that will direct you to the Anpetu Wi website. and that's ANPETUWI.com, wind farm site. And Anpetu Wi is the name of the project. So for us, Anpetu Wi is the beginning of the new day, the first light of the sun. And for us, culturally, that's the strongest time to pray, the most powerful time to pray every day, because you're praying for guidance as the sun's coming up. It reveals what was dark, and also for strength and enlightenment for the new day to get through the new day. So this project, our wind project, is that. It's building that prayer for a new day, not just for Standing Rock, but for other Native nations and other communities that can gather or have natural resources that they can coalesce to do a project that's public focused, community focused, and community benefit. So we could turn to a degree away from strict profiteering, in the sense that, a few investors will be the only ones benefiting from the project, but the communities will have the ultimate benefit in the long term.
Now, I know the great scholar Arjan Magajani is an expert on renewable energy. I've heard him say that the Dakotas, and it may have been just even one Dakota, I'm not sure, could supply the entire country with power. They have that much wind. It must be pretty windy up there.
It's blowing 20 miles an hour right now,
Yeah.
all day. Today's one of those days where it's a 20 to 25 mile an hour day, gusts of up to 30 to 40 miles an hour. And it is this way, I would say, 70% of the time. Our power project is projected at a 50% wind capacity factor, which means that those blades will be turning 50% of the time of the day, 24 hours. Throughout that 24-hour day, 50%. So that's a real great benefit for us. It brings the cost of power that we generate down. It also makes the project a faster turnaround for the investors, so it makes it a less risky project. And the time that the tribe will come into a better benefit of the project come faster. So it's a good thing.
David?
Is it noisy? So the right wing says the wind power is noisy.
And what's beneficial for us is where we're locating it is remotely located from communities. And that's the one thing here at Standing Rock that we're the benefit of. We do have a lot of space. So in between communities is where this project's located, between Fort Yates and Porcupine, North Dakota, about 10 miles east within a valley there, or a low-lying area with ridges. So there are some ranches on the western side of the project, and we're looking to maintain a distance from them as well as protecting our sacred sites. Also, to take care of the birds, that technology, our radar technology, and then painting the blade black so that the birds can actually see it, because that's important to us, is to maintain a relationship with all the creatures that we live with, not just man. So this project, we aim to strike a balance and show how that balance can be done in a way that is beneficial for everyone around it. Nothing's ever 100%, but we're going to work towards it.
Are these going to be domestically manufactured, Joe?
We're looking at a couple different vendors, and there's one vendor who had recently announced that they'll be able to remediate their blades, after the 25 to 30 year cycle. So they won't be putting them in a landfill. They'll grind them up and make blades out of them again. Mm-hmm. And that is one that we would be looking towards. And then there are other manufacturers that we're looking towards that are domestically built. But I'm not at a liberty to say any names just yet.
Are you aware that the Biden administration is proposing $31 billion over 10 years to help Native American communities?
Yes, and it's a great thing. For us, it's finding a way to make sure that we have access to that, and that also that the tribes aren't beholden to cost match or match that is beyond our abilities to meet. For large projects like this, they would be asking for a level of match on a loan. And so what their administration and their team has been working on very well, I would say, for the last month or 2 months, are listening to tribes and listening to tribes' concerns about how we can participate in these. Because even though we have casino, with COVID hitting, that has really driven the revenue down. But there are a lot of needs here at home. We have, like I said, 8,000 people roughly. We are at 40% poverty rate, 70 to 75% unemployment rate. And so there's a lot of help that's given to our people to maintain a life.
Well, it'd be very good that you're building the future and not having to rely on gambling for the future.
Exactly.
And industrial hemp, are they starting now to let you grow industrial hemp instead of sending helicopters in early dawn 20 years ago to uproot the plants?
Right. Those poor guys at Pine Ridge. We had gotten our hemp charter approved through the USDA last year. So for us this year, it is finding the revenue that we need to start the office so that we can license and permit. So that's where, scarce resources are coming into play to ensure that hopefully ensure that we can do that license and permitting so that our landowners and our people can take benefit in growing that crop. I would like to see us manufacture and process here so that we're kicking out products, not just exporting plants.
Sure.
That's where, real benefit lies for us for the future.
And that's where I think part of the $31 billion, which is going to go to roads on reservations, but it should also go to the kind of sustainable energy and sustainable plant life that you're talking about, Joe. This couldn't have come at a better time in terms of getting seed money and investment money from Washington, D.C.
And I want to thank you for helping get that word out, and getting the message out and keeping this connection, going out, this voice going out, because it's important that people know that Native nations haven't disappeared, even though we've been put in the most harshest rurally located locations in the country. And, we have an ability to be productive and provide a lot of the solutions for what we're going to need to live in a balanced way in the future.
Well, thank you, Joe, for proving the title of my first article on Native Americans in 1956 in the Harvard Law Record. It was titled, American Indians, People Without a Future. You're proving that American Indians, Native Americans, are going to have a wonderful, productive, safe, healthy, cultural future. Thank you very much, Joe.
Thank you, Ralph. We appreciate it. Pilame Apollo.
We've been speaking with Joe McNeill. We will link to the Sage Wind Project at RalphNaderRadioHour.com. I want to thank Joe and our other two guests, Dennis Kucinich and Chuck Collins. For those of you listening on the radio, that's our show. For you podcast listeners, stay tuned for some bonus material we call the Wrap-Up. The transcript of the show will appear on the Ralph Nader Radio Hour website soon after the episode is posted.
Join us next week on the Ralph Nader Radio Hour. Thank you, Ralph.
Thank you, everybody. Serious listeners should await with interest the formation of a Congress club to really up the ante on demanding Congress to meet public expectations, especially on the subject of corporate crime, fraud, abuse, and control. We'll describe it in more detail in the next session.
Hi, this is Jimmy Lee Word, producer of the Ralph Nader Radio Hour, and welcome to the Wrap-Up. We're going to hear more from the conversation between Ralph and Dennis Kucinich and Chuck Collins, but first, Steve has an important message for you.
Thanks, Jimmy. As many of you know, I'm in the board of Public Citizen. And last year, we had to make our yearly gala virtual. And it was a big success. And I'm sure many of you watched. Well, we're doing it again this year. We're doing Public Citizen's Virtual Gala 2021. This year's show will be live streamed this coming Thursday, June 24th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, 4 p.m. Pacific Time. And it's free to watch, and it features an incredible lineup of musicians, comedians, and congressional allies. We've got Graham Nash, Lucinda Williams, Lake Street Dive, which is my favorite band, the Show Survivors. We've got comedians John Fugelsang, Nagin Farsad, Barry Tunde Thurston, and Alex Edelman, plus newly elected squad member Mondaire Jones. You'll hear all about the dynamic work Public Citizen is doing to fight corporate power and to support democracy, including how we conceived of the bill and built the coalition for the landmark legislation that is the talk of Washington. And it's also the bane of right-wing corporatists. It's H.R. 1, the For the People Act. And you'll also hear the inspiring story of how Public Citizen teamed up with the NAACP last year to prevent Louis DeJoy's post office from delaying and discouraging mail-in voting. That was a great victory. Public Citizen will also be honoring Congressman Jamie Raskin, the second Trump impeachment manager, with its Golden Boot Award for his remarkable work defending our democracy. So please RSVP to watch the show at citizen.org and share widely to help us spread the word to enjoy what I think is a splendid hour of music, laughter, and inspiration. We'll also be posting it on the Ralph Nader Radio Hour website landing page. So you just click on that. That'll take you to the RSVP and join us. Thank you.
And now some more from Dennis Kucinich.
Dennis, tell us some of the marvelous things you accomplished as mayor years and years ago. And I mean, you spanned the better part of the century in your public work because you were so young when you were elected to the city council. Tell us some of the things you did against amazing opposition every day.
Well, one of the first things was half of the major appointments to my administration came from the Black community because I really felt the need for a true sharing of power.
This is back when?
1977.
Right. Listeners see what Steve meant when he said he was ahead of his time. Go ahead, Dennis.
Including a safety director who was African American who had jurisdiction over the police department. And because I wanted to send a clear signal that the administration of justice would be fair, impartial, colorblind, and that we weren't going to tolerate any kind of misconduct of a racial nature. I also, because you have to remember, we were denied credit. There was a strike by credit. And we ended up running the city on a cash basis by cutting spending 18% without reducing services. And that was by eliminating waste, fraud, and abuse. I also defeated both political parties to get elected at age 31 as the youngest mayor of any big city. We also, thanks to you, Ralph, were able to get a congressional investigation of default. And we basically proved that the banks put the city of Cleveland into default. First of all, Cleveland Trust did because they were trying to extort the light system from the city and tried to force me to sell the city in order to get credit on loans that get a rollover of loans I hadn't even taken out. And then Cleveland Trust and the other banks asked the people of Cleveland for a tax to pay off the defaulted notes. The people passed it, and the bank still kept the city of Cleveland into default.
That was an amazing part of your book. What do you want to do as mayor? When's the election, and what are the 3 or 4 major things?
Ralph, as soon as I get off the phone here, my wife and I are headed to the Board of Elections to file 5,837 signatures, which will place my name on the September 14th primary ballot, and the top 2 vote getters in September then go on to the November 2nd election. So I just began the campaign. I announced 2 days ago. I announced on Monday, and I'm on my way down to the Board of Elections right now. People can go to Kucinich.com and get information on our campain.
Spell that out.
Yeah, it took me years to learn how to pronounce the name, so give me a break. It's Kucinich, Kucinich.com.
And there's no incumbent running, is there?
No, he decided not to run again.
Okay, so it's an open seat.
So it's an open seat, right. It is an open seat.
Any questions from Cleveland Steve Scrovan or New York City David Feldman?
Yeah, Mr. Kucinich, I'm amazed at this because I grew up in Cleveland. I was away at college during your tenure as mayor, so I wasn't as on top of everything, and I was probably a little too callow to understand what was going on anyway. But I remember those days, and I remember that dominant story out there was that you were way in over your head, and you didn't really know what you were doing. And I wonder how it feels to be vindicated, 20 years later. How long, first of all, how long did it take you to be
40? We're talking 42 years later.
Yeah. But that is my recollection. And George Forbes, of course, being a main player in that. And it's interesting to me that you are now friends. And I guess in his old age, he kind of realized what he was doing.
Well, no, I don't know about that. What I do know is that I don't hold grudges. You can't be in politics and be successful if you hold bad feelings towards anyone. I just did my job. And I knew at the time that I was getting smeared because I stood up for the people. If I had played ball, there was, an open road to success. Remember, 31 years old, mayor of a big city. There was a young governor of Arkansas who did very well at that time. And so, Bill Clinton. So you have to remember that I knew exactly what the price was that I'd have to pay. But to me, it was much more important to represent the people than it was to get the false accolades of those who were exploiting the public. And, the idea of being vindicated, when you're in the middle of it, you can't worry about whether you're going to be vindicated or not. I had no idea when I left office as mayor in 1979 that I'd ever have a career again. I was, I heard the song, MacArthur's Park was melting in the dark and all the sweet cream icing flowing down. Someone left a cake out in the rain, and I don't know if I can ever have the recipe again. I didn't know I'd ever have a shot at coming back to public life. And, the way it worked out, I did. 15 years later, I began a comeback to major office. But, I didn't know that. When you're in the moment, you can't be worried about whether people are going to say you're right or wrong. You got to do what you feel is right. That's what I did. I knew I was looking into an abyss. I knew that, my career and any opportunities I might have down the road could evaporate with this one decision I made not to sell our municipal electric plant. But you know what? If I had to do it all over again, I wouldn't change anything.
Well, you proved right. Let's see if NPR, PBS, the rest of the Cleveland media pay attention to this book, because it's a remarkable history of the city that they're doing their media in. And so we're looking forward to see whether the media gives you a fair shake on this book and covers it, or whether the New York Times will even review it. David, any last-minute questions before we close?
Yes, it's an honor to talk with you. My mother is from Cleveland, and I remember you very well. And I hope you get reelected. Jerry Brown was the youngest governor of California, and then the oldest governor of California. Donald Rumsfeld, our old friend, youngest defense secretary, oldest defense secretary. I think you would be the youngest mayor of Cleveland, and then would you be the oldest or one of the oldest?
Well, to me, time's an illusion. I don't really
what
care.
Is to prevent, how do you not become the victim of your own expertise? Because that seemed to happen.
I can do that because I don't believe in victimization. I make my choices and I live with them.
And finally, Steve asks a question of Chuck Collins.
I just had a question that I wanted to ask you. I noticed in the news that Mackenzie Scott, Jeff Bezos' ex-wife, is starting to give away billions of dollars of her fortune. I don't know if you know her, but if you did and she asked you, Chuck, where should I put my money? What should I do with my money? What would you advise her?
Well, it is pretty impressive what she's doing. She's kind of disrupting the way most billionaires give their money away. I think that she could make a really powerful statement by creating a fund for people who work at Amazon, for the wages and disruption that they've gone through over the last year. There's a tremendous expose in the New York Times today about Amazon workers. So that would be one thing. But otherwise, I think she's doing a good job, which is she's not creating a family foundation that's going to be around for 3 generations where her, unborn grandchildren are going to be giving away the money. She's saying, look, I'm going to empty the vault. I'm going to give away this wealth. And she has brought in a lot of really good, smart decision makers, people who work with social movements to help make those decisions. And she's given away now 3 tranches of several $billion each. But yeah, and I would say she should be giving it to grassroots organizing, grassroots social change, things to address the tax inequities, the systemic inequalities. But she's already, made some really smart first moves, I think.
And that's a wrap. Join us next week on the Ralph Nader Radio Hour. Until next time.
Stand up, you've been sitting